Salt of the Earth Farm Stories is proudly brought to you by Grig Media. Step into the world of farmers from diverse backgrounds across Australia. Through intimate interviews, host Darren Grigg delves into farming practices, traditions, and the challenges farmers face in nurturing the land.
Salt of the Earth Farm Stories heads to Larakoona, a tabletop just north of Albury. We chat to Marcus Richardson about his Angus breeding program and the stunning farm he calls home. Good afternoon, Marcus.
Hey, Darren.
Thanks for having me here today, Marcus. Today I want to talk to you about how you are running your farm. I want to touch on the benefits of enhanced farm dams, sustainable agriculture, stock containment, boosting winter pasture, and birds on farms. So can you tell me, where are we and what are you running here?
Sure. So we're in southern New South Wales, southwest slopes, just north of Albury, 15 kilometres north of Albury, just at the foot of Tabletop Mountain, at the end of the Yambler Range. We've got 900 hectares here, or 2,200 acres. We're running an Angus breeding business, selling feeder steers into the Riverina normally at about 475 kilos when we can. And yeah, we're a self-replacing Angus herd.
And has this farm been in the family for generations?
So my father purchased this farm in 1974. Mum and Dad retired probably about 9 years ago now. I was working with Dad towards the end and we took over the management of the property. And yeah, we've recently purchased the property just before the interest rates started going up.
Well done. So you grew up here, but then have you worked away at all?
Yeah, I went to university and studied in northern New South Wales and Armidale, and came back and started working out in the Riverina, accumulating grain for a feedlot. Initially did a few different jobs, worked in the banking industry for a while, and then came back to the farm and worked part-time on the farm and part-time at Wodonga TAFE, doing recognition of prior learning with farmers, and yeah, transitioned to working full-time eventually and taking up management. So it's been 2 generations. I think it's about 50 years now that it's been in the family.
And what an interesting career you've had, and all the right ingredients for the perfect farmer now.
Maybe. You do have to wear a lot of hats in a small business. You do have to be across a lot of things, which makes it harder perhaps than a larger farm business. But and I forgot to say I worked in accounting for a while as well before the bank. But yeah, those things have led to who I am today and the skills I've got.
And can you tell me, what sort of country is this, and what sort of land and soil type have we got on your farm?
Yeah, so they're loam over clay, so there's a clay base. Acidity is pretty good, sort of the background natural acidity in our hills is pretty good, sort of, I think it's high 4s, maybe a 5. We've applied lime to the improved country, so it's about, I was going to look this up, but I think it's about 80% arable, which has all been improved with Phalaris clover. We've got a bit of lucerne, it's probably about 5% lucerne, and we're just starting to sow chicory, lucerne, clover, which is a new mix. So just the front paddock against the highway, you might have saw on the way in, which is sown in June, given the late autumn break, is going to be another 30 hectares of lucerne, chicory, clover, which what came out of Phalaris, so we're sort of changing the mix a bit. Yeah, we run along the Tabletop Creek, we run up to Tabletop Mountain, like I mentioned, so we've got some rising country, which is non-arable and has native medics and grasses through it, and introduced grasses. It's got a lot of remnant veg scattered about the place, as well as some planted shelter belts, which we can see in front of us. We've fenced 6 dams now and planted around those as well.
I want to get to that in a sec, but is sustainable agriculture part of your business plan, is it?
It's not in the plan as much, but I think about our place in the food production system and in the ag production world. So we raise beef cattle. Cattle emit methane, which is a short-lived greenhouse gas. So we have a role to play in reducing emissions. So there's that. But we also, which I could talk about more if you like, but we also have a lot of biodiversity naturally in our farm environment, as opposed to like a cropping system where there's very little other vegetation. We value trees for the biodiversity, but also for the benefits of stock, for shade and slowing wind. So I think in the future, like beef businesses, cattle businesses, their biodiversity value is going to become more and more, and that might be a trade-off with the greenhouse gas emissions.
So what sort of emissions are we looking at on your farm? There's methane, and then is there transportation and...
Yeah, if you look, I've done a carbon audit, and by far the largest emissions we have are the cattle. I think it's over 80%, 85, 90%. So the emissions to do with transport or chemical or diesel use, they're tiny. It's the animals are the important ones.
And can you keep them on for a little bit longer to save transport? Is that something you would factor into a...
Well, the things that make us an efficient cattle producer make us an efficient emitter as well. We need the least emissions per kilo of body weight that goes off the farm. The more efficient we can do that, the less emissions per kilo of animal. And then that is mirrors how to be productive. So we want, everything being fertile and getting in calf. We don't want any, limited cattle, or cows, females not getting in calf. So if they're not producing, they're emitting without an output. So yeah, a fast growing animal that gets up to weight quickly. So that's important. And what other things? I suppose, yeah, minimising death, minimising illness, so we can keep animals growing. They're the things that make us a good from an emissions per kilo body weight. So in that audit, you can come down to that figure, how many emissions per kilo body weight, and there's sort of a range for the average producers, and we're just on the low end of that. So in the future, the people we sell to, these supply chains, they've all made commitments for 2030 for targets, and they're going to look to the producers that have low emissions per kilo that they're buying, so they have to offset less of the emissions that they might be buying, from downstream.
And is that to then for them to on-sell their product with, a good number?
Well, they've made just commitments. They've made targets, so that they have to stick to them. Not quite sure what's pushed them. I think that's government regulation and just being good corporate citizens. But I think where we'll head is just trying to get lowest emissions possible for cattle, because to get zero emissions from cattle is probably a bridge too far. Like they've got a rumen which produces this methane, which has evolved over 50 million years. And we're trying to look for ways to change that, but that's a lot of evolution that we've got to try and get around. So there's ways to reduce it a little bit. There's a couple of products now which you can use, but they're fed to the animal, so they don't suit an extensive grazing business, grass-fed business. They suit when animals are housed, like in feedlots or dairies. We've got to look for genetic progress or a vaccine, or there is a system where you can, I think you treat the mother, and that passes on this knowledge to the calf, and then that calf can be a lower emitting calf for its life, even though you've only just done something at the beginning of its life. Yeah.
Really? And then it runs through the genes?
Well, no, it changes the gut. It's like setting up the gut early in life to be a low emitter.
Wow.
So yeah, Richard Eckard is the guru on all this stuff. And I think it's either research he's done or research he's been associated with, where they can program a calf initially to set its gut up to be a low emitter through its life.
That's fascinating. What does your dad think of this detail of farming these days?
Yeah, I mean, he has an interest. I'm not sure I've asked him that question directly, but yeah, it's certainly become a lot more important than from when he was producing. Yeah.
Driving in today, your paddock's looking green and there's some nice growth there. What have you done coming into winter and those colder months? Have you put on anything like a project you were telling me about?
Yeah, so probably done a couple of things, which we've contained stock to smaller areas and fed them.
To rest paddocks?
To rest paddocks, to try and protect the paddocks, to protect ground cover, like maintain ground cover. When you have ground cover, you can get water to infiltrate and you protect the soil. So you need ground cover. My agronomist is always telling me the best herbicide is ground cover. You stop weeds, you promote growth. Yeah, it looks great now, but it's taken a huge effort and a lot of time, a lot of fodder, which we no longer have on hand, which need to be replaced.
Had you had a lot in storage?
Yeah, we used the good years. Yeah, we had a lot. We had some silage above ground. Within a couple of weeks, we'll have used 900 bales that were underground.
Really? You had them wrapped up?
They've been buried in pits. Yeah, with a plastic cover over the top. What we could create was about 300 bales per year. So we had 3 good years. We put 300, or maybe 4 good years, put 300 bales in the ground each year in a pit.
And this is all ready for a really dry autumn?
Yep, yeah. I thought it was going to be a failed spring, but it's turned out to be a dry autumn. So we've fed stock that. We had hay in a shed. We built a new hay shed recently, and that was all shedded. So yeah, a lot of contained stock, both calves initially from weaning in February, and then cows later on when we didn't happen to rain in autumn or early winter. And then on top of that, like you mentioned, we've used gibberellic acid in June, July, and early August. It's a plant growth regulator which makes grass longer. It elongates the cells in the grass. It comes in a powder. We use 10 grams a hectare.
That's not much.
No, it's amazing. It's not much at all. I can go out spraying with, maybe 250 grams of chemical in a 2,500 litre tank of water, and I'm doing the right thing. So, yeah, that makes cells longer, and it acts over about 3 to 4 weeks. So,
how long does it take to have an effect?
So it's about over 3 weeks, the grass will grow longer. In that 4th week, it'll start to taper off. So we rest, like when we're grazing, we wouldn't graze that paddock for 3 weeks just to make the most of what we've applied. That's been a huge benefit. And it's something we use every year. It's not another lever that we've pulled this year. It's a very cheap way to get grass to grow. It overcomes temperature. So it doesn't overcome lack of moisture.
Yeah.
And the grass has to use nutrients which are in the ground, or you can apply additional nutrients.
So are you tricking the plant that it's not cold?
Yeah, yep. It's what naturally occurs in spring. So the grass just gets, and it works on grasses. It doesn't work on the leaf of a clover plant. The stem will get longer on a clover plant. So you'll see these tall clovers with tiny leaves still. But it works really well on phalaris. So we use 10 grams on phalaris, and you can use it on other plants as well, like ryegrass. You use 20 grams because it takes more of it to work. It's been used in the horticultural industry for 40 years for different reasons, but
really,
it's been used in pastures for a while. I'm not a groundbreaker by any means, but
is there any effect then later on in spring? Does it slow the plant down at all?
No, it doesn't. It's just relies on the nutrients which are around the plant. So you've used some nutrients in winter, so they're not there in spring. But if you've got your fertiliser application right, there won't be any downside in spring. And what you can do, and what I've only just started doing, is applying nitrogen with it. So we spray out the gibberellic acid, and I've just started spraying out a liquid nitrogen, so I can do it in one pass. So that's applying additional nutrients which are more readily available in the winter. Nutrients in the soil aren't readily available because it's cold. So we're actually seeing a bigger response now using liquid nitrogen with the ProGib. And we can also, at the same time, we can do broadleaf weed control. Yeah. That you can mix in herbicides with it, which is typically what happens in the winter. Like you do broadleaf weed control if needed.
Yeah.
We don't do a lot because our pastures are pretty good now. But
yeah, they look great. Going back to stock containment, number one, you're resting some paddocks, but there are a lot of other benefits, aren't there? The stock are probably putting on weight a bit quicker.
Yeah, so when you contain an animal, like we contain the weaners in small areas, they save about 10% of their energy because they're not walking around looking for feed. Mm-hmm. We run about 150 cow mobs, so we put them into the smallest paddocks we have. They still walk a bit, but they're contained that might have been in a 6 hectare paddock rather than average hectare size is 15 for a paddock. So yeah, we're conserving leaf area in the paddock. We're saving the soil, from being eroded when it does rain, and the plant needs to respond once it does rain. If it's flogged into the ground, it takes longer to respond.
And I guess you can control their feed and their nutrients.
Yeah, you are solely responsible for supplying what they need. And a cow will overeat. A cow will eat itself into oblivion, really.
Yeah.
So it's a lot about stopping the cow eating too much. It's not required. Like a cow will just put on, it's probably a survival response, to put on fat, but they don't need it physiologically. And we're actually seeing it now as we're calving. We calved from the 7th of July with our heifers, and they're finished now. And we've just started calving from the 1st of August with our cows, and the calving's gone amazingly so far. Like very little calving difficulty because the calves are small, because we've controlled nutrition.
Really?
Yeah. So they're probably a bit on the small side, but they're calving very well. The first step is to get a live calf.
Yeah. And I suppose being contained, you can keep an eye on them easier.
Yeah, because they're contained and because we're feeding, you do tend to observe them more. Yeah, so you do see things, health issues. We do. I have noticed more this year.
Fantastic. And Marcus, you seem to have a passion for healthy farms, and I believe you're on the board of the Holbrook Landcare Network.
Yeah, yep. I'd like to do something in a volunteer role in the community, and that's what I'm doing at the moment. I've been on the board there for a little while. I'm currently the chairman of the board, just through the way things have worked out. And yeah, it's a really good organisation. I think it's 7 or 8 full-time employees with a great CEO, Alison Southwell. Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting funding environment at the moment. Like it's all grant funding that they run on. At times, there's sort of about a $3 million turnover of that organisation, and not for profit, which is it's doing great things in our neighbourhood.
They are very active, and you've got a great team on board there. I'm looking over some rocky outcrops at the moment and some corridors and so forth. You're constantly working on re-veg?
Yeah, my father's done a lot and we've done some. So there's been shelter belts planted in the past when Landcare got going initially, I think. We've re-established some of those corridors. We've made them a little bit wider, improved fencing and filled in holes and maybe added another row of trees. That's what we've started doing at the moment. And we've got some grant applications in at the moment. We've got some funding from BirdLife Australia, and we're looking for some additional funding from Landcare Australia through a Gallagher grant to do more of that, establish some new belts and improve old belts. And we've also, I spoke earlier, we've fenced 6 dams and revegetated around those dams to try and create biodiversity hotspots on the farm.
Interesting. We're looking at one at the moment, and you've got a hardened access point, and there's a lot of benefits to come with fencing off the dam completely. Their cattle are still getting clean water. But Marcus, I think that's a whole episode on its own, so I'd like to talk to you further another day about enhanced farm dams. I just want to go over to the corridors I'm looking at the moment. You've got a diverse tree species, and I guess that brings in a diverse range of bird species.
Yeah, I think it does. Like we try to have different heights and different species. I'm learning about birds. I'm no expert, but we've got a fella, John Shepherd, who comes quarterly here and does bird surveys. And because of the remnant veg and the shelter belts and our proximity to the Tabletop mountain range or Yambler mountain range, we've got some really good bird species here. We've got about 18 bird species listed on BirdLife Australia's Conservation Action Plan.
Wow.
Which is really high for a farm.
Yeah.
Probably 8 is normal, a high number for a farm, whereas we've got about 18, I think it is. So that's pretty exciting that we've got some great birds. We've got this proximity to the mountain, and we've got some reasonable vegetation. And like I said earlier, that's going to be a cattle farm's place in the environment. It's to create this biodiversity, which is important.
Would you say fencing a little bit of productive farming land, the benefits outweigh the loss of some grazing country?
Yeah, it is something you consider when you're thinking about it, because it's valuable production. But yeah, cattle need shade. We need biodiversity. We like having that that bird life around and the insects. There's predators in those shelter belts which help control red-legged earth mite I think it's the lady beetles that do it mostly, I think. And red-legged earth might attack our clovers. So there's a production benefit there. We slow wind speeds, and those hot years, to have some shade around, it's really important.
That's beautiful to look at. So you love farming, Marcus?
Yeah, I do. I'm a bit exhausted at the moment, to be honest, just with the 6 months we've had. But yeah, no, it's a great occupation. Yeah.
Well, I do want to come back and talk to you about enhanced farm dams one day, but you've been very generous with your time today, Marcus, and I thank you very much.
Thanks, Darren. That's great. Great to have a chat.
Salt of the Earth Farm Stories is proudly brought to you by Grig Media.